Sexual abuse as ritual programming in occult families. Welcome back. I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and this is the Occult Families How to Spot Them series. Trigger warning. This video series covers disturbing and very serious topics. Full legal disclaimer in the video description below. In occult families, sexual abuse serves a purpose far more sinister than personal violation. It is used as a ritual tool of energetic control, a method for opening portals, embedding spiritual contracts, and binding the victim to roles, entities, and timelines they never agreed to. This is not simply perversion, it is precision sorcery. Incest as soul-binding technology. When incest is committed within a ritual system, the act is engineered to collapse identity and overwrite sovereignty. The child is not just violated physically, they are spiritually marked, bonded, and coded. Bloodline incest, in particular, is used to link the child's spiritual frequency to the family's energetic infrastructure, creating a tether that runs far deeper than emotion or memory. The child becomes a spiritual asset, branded, accessible, and programmable. In this system, the parent or relative becomes both the abuser and the energetic gatekeeper. The abuse acts as a forced initiation, one that falsely opens the child to the family's spiritual current. This ritual imprint often manifests in adulthood as confusion around sexuality, difficulty forming boundaries, and subconscious patterns of self-blame or submission. These are not just psychological effects. They are symptoms of spiritual programming. Sexual abuse as portal tech. In metaphysical terms, the body is a gate. When sexual trauma occurs, especially in children, the energetic system is shocked open. This is called portal activation, and in ritual systems, it is used with strategic timing to inject contracts, entities, or roles directly into the subconscious field. The combination of physical violation, emotional betrayal, and dissociation creates a perfect storm for spiritual hijack. During this state, several things can be ritualized. Energy transfer. The child's life force may be siphoned and redirected to another family member, used to power rituals or stored for future use. Entity implantation. Spirits, programs, or artificial thought forms may be embedded during the abuse, especially if the act includes ritual words or symbolism. Destiny hijack. The abuse may be timed to coincide with key life checkpoints, e.g., puberty, first menstruation, birthdays, to reroute the child's path toward a programmed role or energetic fate. The act is not just traumatic, it is alchemical. Sexual abuse in ritual families is designed to collapse the child's identity and open them to outside influence while convincing them that they invited it. This creates an internal confusion loop, where the victim questions their own purity, sovereignty, and responsibility for what occurred. Ritual abuse versus spontaneous abuse. It is vital to distinguish between spontaneous abuse and ritual abuse. While both are devastating and wrong, ritual abuse operates within a structured metaphysical system. Spontaneous abuse may occur from impulse, personal dysfunction, or opportunity. It lacks symbolic timing, coded language, and energetic intention beyond the act itself. Ritual abuse, by contrast, is premeditated, spiritually coded, and often coordinated with other events. It typically includes specific phrases, symbols, family traditions, or is tied to calendar dates, numerology, or energetic windows. It often involves silence, shame programming, and long-term memory erasure. The distinction matters because ritual abuse has embedded contracts. The survivor may be trapped not just by trauma, but by spiritual technologies that keep the abuse looping in emotional memory, energetic behavior, and subconscious programming. Healing requires contract revocation. Survivors of ritual sexual abuse often struggle with reclaiming full spiritual autonomy, not because they are weak, but because a false agreement was installed during the act. The healing process, then, is not simply about processing memories. It involves revoking the ritual code, declaring that the act occurred without consent, naming the abuser and the role they played in the ritual system, breaking any spoken or unspoken contracts made during or after the abuse, reclaiming ownership of one's body, boundaries, and energy field. Because in ritual systems, what was stolen must be called out by name to be returned. Silence maintains the code. Naming dissolves it. Incest and bloodline containment. In generational ritual systems, incest is not an accident of depravity. It is a design of control. Abuse is kept inside the family not just to preserve secrecy, but to serve as a mechanism for energetic containment, identity erasure, and spiritual sealing. When the violator shares the victim's bloodline, the ritual holds a specific potency. It reinforces contracts already embedded in the DNA, and strengthens the bloodline's energetic grip on the child's soul. The purpose of keeping abuse. In the bloodline. In occult families, sexual violation by a blood relative acts as a form of spiritual coding. It links the abused child to the abuser, not only biologically, but metaphysically. The trauma becomes a shared energetic imprint, one that binds the victim's frequency to the family's ritual system. This type of intralineage abuse creates a circuit. The bloodline becomes both the source of trauma and the container for the victim's identity, ensuring that all pain, confusion, and fragmentation cycles inward rather than outward. This is strategic. When the child's trauma remains within the family, it becomes easier to contain, redirect, and reinterpret. The victim is groomed to see the abuser as protector, provider, or spiritual guide. The result is a closed feedback loop: pain without escape, shame without exposure, confusion without clarity. The goal is energetic containment. Outside abusers might scatter the victim's frequency or risk exposure, but internal violators anchor the ritual into the bloodline, reinforcing spiritual contracts that stretch across generations. This is why occult families frequently preserve positions of abuse within parental, grandparental, or sibling dynamics. The abuse becomes a ritual reenactment of previous bindings, and a renewal of the family's metaphysical claim on the child. Incest as ritual binding and containment. When abuse is committed by someone with shared blood or DNA, the act is used to reinforce existing soul ties and collapse individual sovereignty. The victim is no longer seen as a separate entity. They are now of the blood, belonging to the line, one with the current. These phrases are not metaphorical. In ritual systems, such wording becomes spiritual contracts. The incest becomes a sacrament of ownership, a binding spell cloaked in taboo. In these cases, the child's body is used as both altar and offering. The abuse is often timed to coincide with important ritual dates, such as birthdays, equinoxes, or first menstruation, making the act not just familial, but cosmic. The trauma, encoded with symbolism, timing, and bloodline intention, becomes ritual tech. And because the abuser is family, the survivor is taught to see their own violation as an act of love, initiation, or spiritual privilege. This inversion creates a powerful internal distortion. Love becomes fear, loyalty becomes bondage, and identity becomes a replica of the family's projected needs. How betrayal deepens. Soul compliance. The betrayal embedded in incest cuts deeper than the physical. It rewires the emotional and spiritual architecture of the child. When someone meant to protect you violates you, the psyche often collapses inward. The child blames themselves. This is by design. That collapse is used to deepen soul compliance. The child no longer trusts their instincts. Their boundaries become blurry. Their no becomes weak or non-existent. In ritual systems, this is ideal. A compliant vessel, especially one trained through betrayal, offers less resistance and more access. This betrayal also reinforces emotional confusion loops. Because the child is still biologically bonded to the abuser, they may feel guilt for wanting to escape or shame for feeling hatred. These contradictory emotions are harvested spiritually, fueling the system with dense, complex energy that's difficult to transmute without guidance. In this framework, incest is not just crime. It is containment magic. It seals the child inside the family's energetic matrix and makes them easier to program, retrieve, or reuse in later rituals, especially during adulthood, when the patterns may reactivate through relationships, body memory, or spiritual vulnerability. Breaking bloodline containment. To sever these bindings, the survivor must address both the physical act and the metaphysical contract. This includes naming the abuser and declaring their act a violation, not an initiation. Revoking any energetic claims made in the name of the family, lineage, or blood, releasing guilt, shame, or emotional bondage attached to the abuser, reestablishing individual sovereignty as distinct from the family's spiritual infrastructure, because containment requires consent to stay sealed. And once the contract is broken, the child no longer belongs to the line. They return to themselves. Dissociation and fragmentation as ritual design. One of the most sophisticated weapons used in generational SRA is engineered dissociation. This is not a psychological side effect. It is an intentional, ritualized mechanism. Dissociation is the disconnection between the core self and the physical body during trauma. In ritual systems, this psychic absence is treated as an opening, an energetic vacancy that can be filled, programmed, and manipulated. Dissociation is the body's survival response to unmanageable pain. When a child is violated, physically, sexually, or emotionally, they often exit their own awareness in order to survive. The spirit may float out, fragment, or shut down emotionally to preserve the core identity. While this instinct is protective in the moment, ritual families weaponize it for long-term control. When the child dissociates, a vacant space opens in the energetic field. This space becomes accessible to spiritual technologies, contracts, entities, thought forms, or implants. In occult terms, the child becomes a vessel. Because the soul has partially left the body, the field is malleable. And in this dissociative gap, the abuser can install commands, bind spirits, or attach specific patterns that override the child's original essence. This is where fragmentation begins. The repeated use of trauma to induce dissociation splits the child's psyche into distinct parts. These parts, called alters, develop unique personalities, memories, and roles. In ritual systems, this fragmentation is not seen as pathology. It is programming. Each alter is shaped by the type of trauma that created it. One may be trained to obey without question. Another may carry sexual energy for future ritual use. A third may hold rage or pain that the core self cannot process. The system deliberately repeats trauma in specific ways to shape each part with ritual intent. This is known as structured dissociation, the spiritual equivalent of software partitioning. Ritual obedience is often installed during these dissociative episodes. Words are spoken over the body while the spirit is partially absent. Symbols are carved, objects are inserted, or phrases are repeated, often timed to spiritual calendars or planetary alignments. These commands embed themselves into the child's subconscious and create patterns of behavior, emotional triggers, or spiritual limitations that persist into adulthood. In some cases, an entire false identity is programmed into the dissociated space. Survivors may adopt beliefs like, I exist to serve, I must protect the family, or I am dangerous, without ever realizing those thoughts are not their own. These beliefs act as internal scripts, shaping relationships, careers, and even spiritual practice according to the needs of the original ritual system. Entity attachment also occurs during fragmentation. Spirits, thought forms, or assigned familiars may be bound to the altars created through trauma. Because the child cannot defend themselves energetically in a dissociative state, these attachments remain unchallenged, functioning like background programs that siphon energy, hijack decisions, or enforce ritual obedience. To break this design, the survivor must become conscious of the dissociative architecture. This includes identifying emotional blanks or memory gaps, recognizing voices, impulses, or thoughts that feel foreign, locating moments where their behavior seems out of alignment with their core self. Once identified, the goal is not to destroy the altars, but to reintegrate them, to bring the fragmented parts back into union with the core identity, and to revoke any contracts, entities, or imprints installed in those dissociative moments. Because dissociation was used to fracture you, but it can also reveal the entry points of the ritual. And once you reclaim those scattered parts, the system loses access to what it once used to control you. Timeline loops and spiritual checkpoints. In generational SRA systems, time is used as both a weapon and a container. The architecture of trauma is not random. It is often mapped to a series of key life events, spiritual thresholds, and emotional anniversaries. This strategy is known as timeline looping or ritual checkpointing. Specific points in a survivor's life are programmed to reactivate pain, trauma, or altered states. These are not just triggers, they are timed resets, designed to destabilize progress and redirect the survivor back into the ritual system. A time lock is a spiritual mechanism in which trauma is embedded with a future activation point. The original abuse, usually in childhood, is coded with emotional, psychic, or hormonal signatures that are designed to reawaken during similar energetic conditions. For example, a traumatic event that occurred at age 7 may be programmed to resurface at age 14, 21, or 28, each a multiple of 7, mirroring the original wounding. This is not accidental. These cycles reflect occult numerology and life stage initiations. Survivors may find that certain ages, months, or dates always bring collapse. These are often ritual anniversaries, the hidden milestones of abuse. They may not consciously remember the original trauma, but the body remembers. The nervous system, the emotional field, and the dream state all begin to unravel as the program checkpoint nears. The symptoms can include panic attacks, memory flooding, spiritual despair, relational sabotage, or complete life derailment. This system functions as spiritual maintenance. The family or spiritual network that installed the programming expects the trauma to resurface. It becomes a form of energetic taxation. Pain is harvested again and again across the survivor's lifespan, without the abuser having to be physically present. The ritual calendar does the work. In some cases, the rituals are reenacted symbolically. The survivor may find themselves drawn into relationships, jobs, or environments that mimic the original trauma, repeating the emotional tone, the power dynamic, or the betrayal pattern. This is called life event mirroring. It is designed to keep the soul in alignment with the original ritual contract. Milestone-based sabotage is also common. Right as the survivor is about to break through, start a family, publish a book, change careers, relocate, something collapses. These collapse points are not always sabotage from outside forces. Often, they are embedded from within, tied to the energy of a contract that says, you must not surpass your bloodline. This kind of psychic sabotage is one of the most painful to recognize, because it comes dressed as personal failure, when in fact it is engineered collapse. To undo timeline looping, the survivor must begin to map their collapse points. Identify the birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, or astrological cycles that trigger emotional unraveling. Then, begin a process of conscious interruption. Break the pattern on purpose. Create new rituals on those dates. Speak aloud the decision to sever the energy from its old assignment. Because once a checkpoint is no longer met with unconscious agreement, it loses power, and the spiral becomes a staircase. The false initiation. In ritual families, abuse is not always delivered with brute force or overt cruelty. Sometimes it is wrapped in sacred language. Children are told they are special, chosen, or born for a higher purpose. These phrases, when spoken in the context of pain, trauma, or ritual abuse, become one of the most deceptive and damaging tactics used by generational systems. This is the architecture of the false initiation, a manipulation of spiritual identity to keep the child tethered to the abuser through the illusion of purpose. A false initiation occurs when language typically associated with honor, empowerment, or sacred lineage is used to spiritually groom a victim. In occult families, this often begins early. During or after abuse, the child is praised for their strength, or told that enduring suffering is a sign of divine selection. This distortion plants the belief that pain equals power, that being chosen means being violated, and that love looks like sacrifice. The child, desperate for meaning and recognition, internalizes the abuse as part of their spiritual identity. They believe they must suffer to ascend, that their suffering is holy, that their silence is loyalty. This creates a binding loop between trauma and identity, where to walk away from the abuse would feel like walking away from their calling. These false initiations are not always overt. Sometimes they show up in symbolic acts, being given a ritual name, an object of significance, or a whispered phrase only shared with the child during abuse. These tokens act like spiritual contracts. They imprint the child's subconscious with the idea that they have been selected for a higher path, and that the path requires obedience to the system that hurt them. As the child grows, the belief system deepens. The survivor may find themselves drawn to careers, relationships, or spiritual communities that mirror the original ritual setup. They may become a healer, a priestess, a psychic, or an activist, roles that appear empowering, but often replicate the dynamic of giving all their energy in service to others, while neglecting their own boundaries, needs, and sovereignty. This is how the false initiation bleeds into adult life. In relationships, survivors of false initiation often fall into patterns of spiritual servitude. They are drawn to people who need fixing, saving, or elevating. They may stay in toxic dynamics because they believe it's their job to hold space, transmute pain, or heal generational wounds. These beliefs were not born from love. They were coded through trauma. The false initiation can also manifest as deep guilt or fear when considering separation from family, religion, or identity structures. The survivor feels like they are betraying something sacred, even though what they are leaving behind is abuse. This is the final lock of the false initiation, the belief that breaking free means spiritual failure. To break this programming, survivors must first name it. Name the moment they were told pain was holy. Name the phrases that wrapped chains in gold. Name the objects, titles, or symbols that were offered in exchange for silence. Because the true initiation begins when the lie is seen clearly and rejected completely. You were not chosen because you suffered. You were chosen because you see. And once you see the trap, you are no longer in it. Hi, I'm Adeline Atlas, 11 times published author, and what you just watched is part of my signature program, the Chosen One series inside School of Soul. This series is not just a course, it's a blueprint for those who know they were different from the start. The black sheep, the scapegoat, the truth teller, the cycle breaker. Inside, you'll discover the family roles playbook, the golden child, the scapegoat, the enabler, the lost child, and how to finally step out of the part you were cast in without consent. How the black sheep becomes the goat, turning rejection into radical transformation in leadership. How to break generational curses and rewrite ancestral contracts so the pain stops with you. And how to recognize and escape modern forms of spiritual and technological targeting, from gang stalking to synthetic synchronicity. This isn't just about survival. It's about awakening, about reclaiming your voice, your lineage, and your destiny as one of the chosen ones. Click the link below to access the full series now, because the role ends the moment you decide it does, and the real script begins with you.